Okay, it's time to talk about Trump supporters. What defines something as a cult? How do we differentiate between a cult and a religion, or a political movement, or anything else? One of the prominent figures in the field of research, Stephen Hassan, wrote a whole book about the Trump cult. So how are cults defined? There are a number of models used in psychology to determine if something is a cult or not. The definition is a lot narrower and more specific than you'd think. The model used in courtrooms is called the ICSA model. It was published by the International Cultic Studies Association, founded in 1979. Then there's the BITE model, written by Stephen Hassan. First of all, the ICSA model is hyper-focused on religious cults, and doesn't really leave much room for political cults, like QAnon, or psychology cults, like Scientology. And the BITE model is good too, but I feel like it's missing a couple of critical details. For one thing, the BITE model isn't designed for decentralized cults, like anti-vaxxers or flat earthers. It's designed for centralized, hierarchical movements, like Jehovah's Witnesses, Branch Davidians, or Heaven's Gate. And that's fine, but what we're dealing with in Trump supporters is a decentralized, focused cult, what I call a level 2 cult. It's a cult focused around a specific figure. Level 1 cults are similar, except they don't have a specific figure or leader that they look to for all their information. That's where flat earthers and anti-vaxxers would fall. And then level 3 cults are centralized, hierarchical groups like Jehovah's Witnesses or Scientologists. So where do Trump supporters fall on the chart? They're a level 2 cult, decentralized, with no clear leadership, and focused on a single figure. This would be your standard cult of personality. So what makes something a cult? Why would Trump supporters be considered a cult, but Biden supporters aren't? What's the difference? Cults are all about control and manipulation. That's what makes them different from any other standard group. Their manipulation strategies fall into 4 main categories. This is where the BITE model comes in. They manipulate people through behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotion control. The key behind behavior control is to form out a new identity for the person. Form out a new cult personality that's more useful to the group. Jehovah's Witnesses call this the Christian personality, or the new personality. They do this through Pavlovian behavior modification, a system of rewards for saying and doing the right things, and punishments for doing the wrong things. In a centralized hierarchical cult like Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, you've got a board of leaders, generals, and deacons at the very top who outline a set of rules and expectations, and people who don't follow those rules and expectations will suffer the consequences. In a level 1 cult, decentralized and non-focused, like flat earthers, you've got uniquely self-imposed behavior modification. These normally pop up in social media groups. Fellow members will say progressively more extreme things to raise their rank within the group. The more extreme you get, the more you're respected. Like some vegan groups are okay with wearing leather as long as it was bought secondhand. In this type of decentralized, non-focused group, the most extreme members define the ideology, and thus the rules. If somebody in the group finds out you wore leather, you're publicly shamed for it across the entire message board. That's how behavior modification works within centralized hierarchical groups, but it also works that way to some degree with decentralized focused groups too, like Trump supporters. The main difference is they look to their central leader, Donald Trump, for leadership. If there's a question whether or not he'd want the group to do or believe something, the group fills in the gaps with the level 1 style public shaming. The logical progression for cults is to get more and more extreme. The more extreme you are, the more righteous you are, if you will. Though righteousness is kind of a religious term, and in this case we're talking about a political cult rather than a religious cult, the term still stands. Then we've got information control. This is where level 1 and level 2 cults are really different from each other. Since Donald Trump hasn't fully formed out a full-blown ideology like Jehovah's Witnesses have, for example, the cult has to look elsewhere for what they should think and believe. They look for sources that most closely align with Trump's beliefs. But if that source of information deviates from what Trump says, they always default to believing Trump. Don't believe your lying eyes, believe me. That's the idea. Like I said, with centralized hierarchical cults like Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, or even Scientology, they have a fully formed out belief system that they've been working on for decades. In some cases, centuries. Anytime some big controversial thing happens, the members go to the Jehovah's Witnesses website to see what their opinion is on the subject. They release regular articles about what members should think and feel and believe. But Trump is only one man, and he doesn't put much time into telling his followers what to believe. He's more emotion-driven than a centralized hierarchical cult, so he points them in the right direction and makes corrections as necessary. In the case of level 1 cults, decentralized, non-focused, like flat earthers and anti-vaxxers, there's nobody pointing them in the right direction. It's more ideology-driven. The highest status members, i.e. the ones who've managed to raise their status by being the most extreme, define what information the group accepts and what they don't accept. Sometimes an enlightened centrist will come along and fracture the group, like a vegan who says, I feel like buying leather secondhand is acceptable. The two newly formed groups will part ways. You see this happen a lot with level 1 and level 2 cults. Before Trump, the Republican Party was already forming into a cult. Fox News was nothing more than a propaganda network. When Trump came along, some Fox News viewers took on Trump as their leader, and a fracture formed. Now there's a group of Republicans who watch Fox News, but ultimately take Trump's word over theirs. There's another group who absolutely hates Fox News because Trump said they betrayed him. And there's a group who hates Trump because they feel like he's deviated from the original ideology. Anyways, that's information control, and that's how it works within cults. Behavior and information control are two categories that contain the most differences between different types of groups. Okay, now let's talk about thought control. This one is pretty similar across types of cults. The idea here is to demonize people outside the group and shut down critical thinking. Here are some of the points from the BITE model. Instill black and white, us versus them, good versus evil thinking. Change your identity, possibly even your name. Use loaded language and cliches to stop complex thought. Teach thought-stopping techniques to prevent critical thoughts. Use excessive meditation, singing, and prayer to block thoughts. And reject rational analysis, critical thinking, and doubt. You see this stuff a lot with Trump supporters, particularly black and white thinking. They make up nicknames for their enemies, dehumanize them, come up with reasons to hate them, even if the reasons are complete fabrications. They talk about liberals ruining the country. They instill a sense of superiority into the members. They have the real information. They know the right way to do things. Everybody else is an enemy, and they don't deserve to live in your country. Having an enemy to fight is an important part of running a cult. You can use that enemy to build enthusiasm, instill a sense of purpose, which is defeating that enemy, and most importantly, out of any of it, you have somebody to persecute you. The persecution complex is one of the most important parts of any cult. It's how they rally troops. It's how they whip people into a blood frenzy, a sense of injustice. If you make people feel they're being persecuted, they'll do absolutely anything to destroy the person or thing that you've told them is the source of that injustice. Trump is the master of making people feel like he's being wronged, and more importantly, that they're being wronged by proxy, if nothing else. That's where you get pictures like this. If it wasn't apparent already, all 4 of these control tactics are linked. If you don't control people in these 4 different ways, they start reaching out in one of the other ways to help them figure out what's happening to them. If you're controlling people's behavior, but you aren't limiting them emotionally, i.e. you aren't alienating them from and demonizing their friends and family, they'll reach out for help outside the group, and you risk losing control. That brings me to my next and final category on the BITE model, emotional control. Here are some of the main points. Instill irrational fears or phobias of questioning or leaving the group. Label some emotions as evil, sinful, or wrong. Teach emotion-stopping techniques. Promote feelings of guilt, shame, and unworthiness. Shower you with praise and attention, aka love bombing. Shun you if you disobey or disbelieve. And finally, teach that there's no peace or happiness outside the group. The main idea behind this one is to isolate people from the outside world. Shut down critical thinking through thought control. Limit the information they have access to or believe through information control. Set up a system of rewards and punishments for stepping out of line with behavior control. And isolate you from people who would challenge the worldview or the information through information control. Usually picking up a new extreme ideology like Trumpism is more than enough to isolate you from friends and family anyways. They'll start viewing you as a nutbag when you start spouting off Trump's conspiracy theories. But if your mom or your brother really starts pushing back, it's a signal that he bought into the deep state lies and it's time to cut him loose. He can't come in the bunker when Civil War 2.0 starts. Make him think catastrophe is right around the corner. Create a sense of urgency and oppression. Instilling irrational fears and phobias. Make the members feel like there's no room for empathy. They're gonna have to deal with far worse than this in the ensuing war. Label some emotions as evil or wrong and teach emotion-stopping techniques. This is all in the cult playbook. A while back, the YouTube channel PragerU put out a propaganda video that perfectly exemplifies love bombing at Trump rallies. There was a liberal who decided to make her way to a Trump rally just to see what it was like. She starts out by saying she was a Bernie supporter, just like you, trying to create a personal connection between herself and you or your ideology.
I wouldn't be caught dead at a Donald Trump rally. I mean, come on. I've given money to Bernie. And yet there I was, February 2020, listening to the President of the United States address a crowd of 11,000 supporters. How in the world did that happen?
Then she goes through a logical process of just checking things out, decided to go to a Trump rally, and lo and behold, what happened? She was love bombed.
My friends urged me not to go. They feared for my safety. One offered me her pepper spray for protection. I declined, but I won't pretend I wasn't nervous. I had no idea what to expect. At first, I said nothing to those around me. I didn't want to provoke a scene, but then, as people are wont to do when stuck in a long line, we started to chat. First pleasantries, and then to more serious topics. And here's what I discovered. These people were so nice. No one harassed me, no one intimidated me, no one threatened me. In fact, when I mentioned I was a Democrat, their response was invariably a smile and welcome.
Big surprise, that's what cults do. It's literally right in the model that's used in the psychology community to determine if something is a cult or not. That was ultimately the entire point of the PragerU video. Trump supporters were nice to her. I wonder what would have happened if a Jehovah's Witness decided to knock on her door. Now don't get me wrong, I don't think she's to blame for getting suckered into this cult. I don't really blame anybody for joining a cult. They prey on the emotionally vulnerable. They try to find people who just suffered a tragedy or somebody who isn't really sure who they are yet. Cults have been doing this for centuries, maybe millennia, but this video seems to be giving reasons why you should be a Trump supporter, when, to me, it's just proving how cult-like it is. On January 6th, 2021, we saw the logical progression of any cult come to a head. Trump called his cult members to come to DC. He spent the past 4 years whipping them into a blood frenzy, making them feel like he's persecuted, like they're persecuted. He encouraged anger, vitriol, tribalism, and hatred. He encouraged othering. He made them think that if you're not with us, you're against us. And he pointed them in a direction and set them loose. Was anybody really surprised by the end result? This is what happens with cults. If guardrails aren't put up, if the leaders aren't sensible, if they don't draw lines in the sand and say, this is as far as I'll go, then the group inevitably ends up just like Jonestown, or Heaven's Gate, or the Branch Davidians. They're perfect examples of groups that followed the ideology to the logical end. Trump supporters are in a cult, and as surprised as I am to say this, the only reason there wasn't more destruction on January 6th is because Trump hasn't fully realized his potential as a cult leader yet. Lucky for us, he's leaving office, which means his power will be seriously diminished. But if he's as narcissistic as I think he is, it won't matter if he's the president or not. He still has a base of loyal followers who will follow him to the depths of hell and back. At least we can take solace in the fact that he lost the election. I would not want to stick around for the next 4 years if he'd won.